All right, we're back in the office today. No more sitting in my empty living room recording a podcast at late at night. Today, talking about the top 3 receivers in the NFL draft. We'll talk a little about the franchise tag, and Trevor Sikkema of PFF joins us. Here we go. All right. I have now had a chance to finalize sort of my draft grades on the top 3 receivers. Malik Neighbors is supposed to work out in his pro day, so we will adjust those when he actually works out. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to work out, and Rome Odunze already worked out at the combine, so they are officially done. I will say Marvin Harrison Jr. is the number 1 receiver. I gave him a 91 grade. I think he'll be an all-pro player. I don't think he's as good as the media's prop him up to be, mainly because the media is making him seem like he's a Hall of Famer already. Again, I think he'll be good. And Trevor and I talk about that in the interview. But he's going to be very good. But there are some concerning aspects to Marvin's game. Mainly his lack of production after the catch at Ohio State. His separation grades were not great. But overall, this is one of the freakiest athletes I've ever seen at receiver. And he's got crazy top end speed. He's like a rare deep threat. He's going to be good. He's going to be very good. The floor on him is still a plus starter, which is a great floor. It's just, there are some things about his game that make him not a perfect prospect. But I don't think anyone expects him to be a perfect prospect outside of the media hype. The next guy for me, I know for most it's Malik Neighbors. I actually love Rome Odunze. I only have him 1 grade below Marvin Harrison. I have Marvin Harrison 91. I have Rome at 90. Rome Odunze had an amazing combine. Amazing. His agility drills were very good, and it pairs well with what we've already seen on tape from him, having some of the best hands, probably the best hands between the 3 of them. His speed's okay at 4.45. It's better than so here's the thing, right? Malik Neighbors is projected to have a 4.51 40. We don't know what's going to be yet. However, on the tracking data, he's fast. So we'll have to see how that translates. But for Rome, though, outstanding contested catcher, very good deep threat. Not as good as Harrison, but still very good. Incredible versus man. Not that good against zone, which is surprising. I might say not that good, like above average. Just not good in comparison to these 3 guys. But overall, these guys are. Rome is a great player. Like his ability after the catch, I don't feel has shown up yet in the production, though. We've seen him take jet handoffs really well. We've seen him return kicks really well, but his yak isn't there yet. I do think it'll get better, but it's kind of the same deal with Marvin Harrison. Just Rome's hands are better. But again, I still have Marvin Harrison Jr. slightly above Rome. And then finally, Malik Neighbors, who has an 85, which is still an impact player, right? I have Rome Marvin Harrison Jr. as all pro players, Malik as an impact player, pro type player. Unfortunately, a lot of the things for Malik have to be not guesses, but educated guesses, right? Like we don't really know. We don't have a numbers on his change of direction speed, his 3-cone, his shuttle, is 40. We have to go off the tape. And going off the tape, he's a solid player, right? Like he has above average separation, and his hands are pretty good. He's again he's good after the catch, but not amazing. He's a hell of a deep threat. But his contested catch numbers are like about average. And he's the exact opposite of Rome, right? He's excellent in zone and okay or decent in man. What I find fascinating about all 3 of these guys, though, is that how I have them ranked for draft grade is I have them ranked opposite for their first-year grade. Because I separate first-year grade and career grade. Because we've seen guys start hot and fizzle out, and we've seen guys start slow and be amazing. from doing the research on productive first year players, Malik Neighbors actually should be the most productive first year player, and I think he can be, a Pro Bowl first year player. I just think he might take a little bit of a slide, or after the peaking early in his career, while Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze go up after their first year. So I have Malik Neighbors as a 91 in his first year, so almost an all-pro level, and then dropping to an 85 in his draft grade. Rome Odunze at an 88 in his first year, going then up to a 90. And Marvin Harrison Jr. she's starting low, 83, and going up to 91. And all right, so here are the same thing with the draft grades there, primary traits and secondary traits. For first year grades, the first year grades, the primary traits we've seen, your grade versus zone, the PFF grades actually are very important. His intermediate receiving ability, very important. And then the secondary traits, hands, contested catch ability, run after catch. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is very average in those secondary traits. Pretty good in those primary traits, minus his intermediate receiving ability is like, while not bad compared to his peers, compared to guys who come out in the draft in the last 5-6 years, below average. While Malik Neighbors is excellent in the primary traits, like a 95 in the primary traits. And the secondary traits are pretty decent, 82. And Rome Odunze, a balance in both, right? An 87, 89, which is why it comes out to an 88. But I did find it very interesting how these guys rank and how they stack up. I will finish up the rest of the first round guys probably tomorrow. That will be Keon Coleman, Xavier Leggett, Xavier Worthy. I love that kid out of Florida. His numbers are incredible. I think, just looking at the numbers I crunched, like Ricky Parasol's at an 89, which that's without the analytics grade and without the film grade. So that might drop. Absolutely might drop. But early on, that's definitely raising, it's got my attention. But without further ado, I was so happy to be joined by my buddy Trevor Sikkema. We're bringing in a new segment today, Draft Weebs. And Trevor is our first Draft Weeb. All right, I'm joined by the co-host of the NFL Stock Exchange and the lead draft analyst for PFF, Trevor Sikkema. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing fantastic, Matt. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Dude, thank you for slumming down to our level after being on NFL Network on Friday. So this is a bit of a step back for you, but I appreciate you coming on. It's good to see you again.
No, this is the progression of things, right?
Oh, yes.
You do like local TV, you get a couple of network spots, you hit NFL Network, and then you're on Stopsky's podcast. Like that's how it goes. That's the arrow is continually pointing up. I'm going to text my dad and tell him that he's got to listen to this podcast, just like I did for NFL Network. So
right, don't me. Like not Rich Eisen. Don't do Eisen or NFL Radio. Like, do this one. This is the one where you have to be on.
This is what we're doing. This is what we're here.
So I was telling you a little bit in the green room. When I was in Indianapolis, I saw our friend Matt Collier, who wrote the book on PFF, literally, and he lovingly or not so lovingly referred to guys at Indy, the draft guys, as draft weebs, which I was very tempted to change the name of this podcast to Draft Weebs, because that's how I always felt, being loving the draft growing up. So I figured, for the first guest of Draft Weebs, I had to get a double nerd, because draft guys are nerds, right? But I need a nerd within a nerd, and that's why I got you, Trevor.
And I'm honored.
I'm honored. You should be, because I didn't get like some uncultured swine like Austin Gale. I got you. And that's why I got it. but like any,
you had to get somebody who actually enjoys the movie Winter Soldier, as one should.
Yeah. So before we dive into anything, I want you to pound the table like you would for a draft prospect and tell Austin Gale and the greatest living director, Martin Scorsese, why they're uncultured swine and why the MCU actually is cinema.
I mean, it absolutely is. Like there's no debate here. You don't have like not every movie has to be the most complex thing in the world. Sometimes you just want to kick back and watch a good action movie with a little bit of storyline. And that's what an MCU movie is. It's an action movie. You got a plot twist. Like you've got the hero kind of coming up. You discover who the hero is, and then boom, they get knocked down, and then they come up and they triumph at the end. Is it boring? Like, I mean, yes, it is. The plot is not that complex. However, I will argue that Winter Soldier, when you take off the mask and you realize the Winter Soldier is Bucky, I mean, it's one of the greatest plot twists in MCU history. So, look, I could not disagree more. Respect, love Austin Gale to death.
Oh,
Could not disagree with him more when he says the MCU movies are trash and that Winter Soldier is bad, because Winter Soldier is objectively a fantastic film.
I agree. Listen, I think you pitched it well. So Martin Scorsese, you can go fuck yourself. Trevor Sikkema says that this is good cinema, and I agree, because not every movie has to be complex. Look at every single Scorsese mob film; they're essentially the same beat for beat type of movie. Not every film has to be 3.5 hours long and de-age Robert De Niro down to 20 years old. So I agree. I think you did a good job. Before we get into the receivers, into the draft, like any nerd, there is an origin story. I've been following your career for a bit, but tell the people how we got here, how you ended up being lead draft analyst at PFF, Trevor Sikkema, who's on all the major networks.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I'll go back to the very beginning. I love sports growing up. I would watch sports and go to sporting events, play sports with my dad. Grew up playing hockey, played basically every sport, though, under the sun. When it came to high school, I wanted to play football, but I was about 5'4", 125 pounds when I was like a sophomore in high school. And so my mom was like, no, actually, we're not going to sign off on that. So never actually got to play football in high school, but absolutely loved the sport, loved the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ended up going to school, not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up taking a sports radio class with a good friend of mine just to mess around with an elective. And we ended up having such a good time. We hosted a sports radio show on campus that I think 8 total people listened to. 6 of them, they were forced to listen to it because it was coming over the loudspeakers of one of the halls. And so it was just something that I loved to do. I didn't care how many people were listening. I didn't care how many people were watching. I just loved talking about sports. I loved bringing a different perspective, thinking critically about things. And from there, I ended up transferring to the University of Florida. Got my degree in telecommunications and sports broadcasting, basically, is what I wanted to do out of school. I was kind of bouncing around with some freelance jobs, and I ultimately got a full-time gig with pewterreport.com, which covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And for me to be 25 years old at that time, working full-time in the industry, covering my childhood NFL team, was pretty special. And I never took any day for granted. And I hope that my work always reflected that. Truly, absolutely loved that job. Got to work there for about 3 years. Started a company called the Draft Network with some of my best friends in media and in the world. And we had a lot of fun starting that company, and ended up going over to the Draft Network full time after Pewter Report. Was there for a couple of years. And then the aforementioned Austin Gale ended up calling me about coming to work for PFF. And I ended up moving over to those guys. And it's kind of their studio host for a couple of years. That's what I kind of came on to do with them. And then when Mike Renner ended up leaving last year, I said, hey, the NFL draft is what I love the most. It's how I got into football. It's what intrigued me most about the game, the team building, the roster building, scouting, making decisions, making the right call on the player that makes the biggest difference in the world when it comes to that one play, that one game, the one win that gets you on a playoff push and to win a Super Bowl. So that's something that always captivated me. And here I am, kind of very, very lucky, very blessed to sit in this seat as lead draft analyst for Pro Football Focus.
I love that story, man. I really do. And, because there are a lot of people. Now, you've been to Mobile. You see how many guys are there that have like 3 followers, 4 followers. Even at the Super Bowl, there are some shows that I swear have 3 listeners that I walk around with.
Doing it for the love of the game, baby. Doing it for the love of the game.
Gotta love ball. By the way, I was at practice yesterday. I asked my kids if they love ball, and they looked like I was, well, what the fuck you talking, Coach? What the fuck you talking about? I'm like, you gotta love ball, guys. Felt like
you do though. You're teaching. Maybe they don't get it now, but they will.
One day they're gonna love ball. They'll be 40 years old and ball with a gut, but they'll love ball. But there's a lot of guys. And listen, I count myself as one of them. When you're first starting out and you're kind of you're writing for nobody, you're broadcasting for nobody, you're watching film for nobody besides yourself. It's just the grind. You gotta love the grind, just kind of continue with it. And to see you go from I remember what you being a Pewter Report up to now where you are is pretty incredible, all the way to the Stopsky podcast. That's really,
I know, dude. And
really.
this is it. This is it. This is the Mount Everest. It really
Mhm.
is. Like all of those late nights, grinding the tape, getting the prospect articles out there, that nobody's going to read. Like it all is culminated to the Scopsy podcast. And I think that's, yeah, it's just a testament to what you have built. The fact that that everyone in the industry obviously feels this way about your podcast.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it's like it's all downhill from here for you. No, because you're only like in your early 30s. It's hard to reach your peak this early. Best of luck with your life moving forward.
I got to find something else to do. Like
Right
I
now,
change careers.
yeah, we can. I don't know what's next for you. Maybe you can. Well, you live in the South. You can go golf for a living. There's some good golf
Sure.
where you are.
Maybe I'll become a barbecue pit master. Like
Oh,
that might be next for me. As we're
listen,
getting into the 30s and then 40s. Smoking meats. I feel like that's typical. Like what do I do next? Kind of a
listen.
career.
What does the smoking meats and talking ball? That's like
Wow,
this is where it's at. Like I don't
wow.
know why you haven't already done this. That's
It
that's
might
a
be a
great idea.
podcast itself, right
Yeah,
there.
smoking mates. Like I'm, I'm very. Speaking of guys that smoke, or smoke, smoke defenders, the receivers in this class. Obviously, for you, Mike Evans, the number 1 receiver in the free agent class, re-signs with the Buccaneers.
Mhm.
I know you being a Bucs fan. That's probably great. I'm happy to see him return. But this receiver free agent class now is done. T. Higgins has gotten franchise tagged. I don't think Pittman Jr. has been tagged as of recording, but Chris Ballard said in Indianapolis, Pittman's not becoming a free agent. He's going to end up in Indy. So I expect to either see a report that he's been tagged or that he's been signed in the next few hours. So now the best receiver in the class is, Calvin Ridley, maybe.
Mhm.
You're really paying $17 million for Calvin Ridley? Maybe. So a lot of teams that need receiver help are now looking towards the draft. And the draft is rumored to be pretty stacked, especially at the top. Now, I talked with a few of your PFF colleagues in Indy, and I said that I didn't love Marvin Harrison Jr. the same way that some did, and Max gave me the hardest side eye I've ever received from anyone that wasn't my dog. So I need to know, where do you stand on Marvin Harrison Jr.? Because I think in the media we have this tendency to sometimes overinflate certain players that, while he may be very good, they're talking about him like we should just get the gold jacket ready today.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't want to crown prospects before they take their first snap in the NFL. Like, even though he's got the Hall of Fame name, he's got the Hall of Fame father. I mean, you're not just putting this guy in the Hall of Fame immediately. But I will say that you see a lot of that football DNA and that background show up in his tape already. A lot of the things that you would want to coach up about a player, he already does those things really, really well. I mean, he's very precise with his hands. He understands how to attack different leverages. He knows how to get off the line of scrimmage. He's got a variety of different releases that he will use to get off of that press coverage, create that separation and that space very, very quickly. And then when it comes to the athletic ability, I mean, his dad was like, what, 6'2"? He's like 6'4" and a half. I mean, like, he's just a supersized version, it feels like. He's got a great big catch radius. He's got a great hand-eye coordination, great catching strength to be able to maximize that at all times. I think his speed is pretty explosive, but I also think it's smooth. I think he can be a vertical threat for you. I think he could also be an over the middle of the threat with how much he can be a good contested catch receiver when it comes to catches at the sideline. I think the footwork is fantastic. Now, it wasn't totally a big yards after catch guy before this past year, but I think that he showed that was more opportunity than a lack of ability, because they put him in a spot to really gain yards after the catch in 2023, and he showcased that very, very well. I just think there's not really anything about his game that I think is a true weakness. I really don't. And in the NFL draft, it's just about picking good football players. I mean, to simplify how the process works. And there are a lot of really talented guys that come through the NFL draft that get picked very, very highly that don't turn into anything. We call them busts, right? And everybody wants to talk about like who's going to be the next bust. Oh, I think this guy's going to be a terrible player and he's going to get drafted high. It's really, really hard to envision a world where Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't get picked 3rd overall, 4th overall, 5th overall, whatever it is, and he's a bust in any way, shape, or form. Might he not be wide receiver 1 at the NFL level? I don't know. Ceiling is so tough to predict, but in terms of his floor, I don't see how this guy is not an extremely productive pro at the next level.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think, so I fell into the trap, and then this happens, not often, but it does. When you're not super high on a prospect that everyone else is high on, you kind of have to like dig your heels in, and it almost becomes like where I thought Marvin was an all pro type player, absolutely, but not Hall of Fame worthy. Or like, no, let's crown him today.
Not like pick him over a quarterback type of a player, right?
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And it became like it went from that to like Marvin Harrison's not good, and like that you don't want to go to that route.
Right.
That
Yeah.
happens all the time, right? And on the opposite, right, there are times you like a player that not everyone else likes, and you think he's like he's an average player, and by the time you're done talking about him, you're described like a Hall of Fame. You're like, all right, we got to walk this back for a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah. Right. No, I know. Yeah, I understand.
So I had a chance to rewatch Marvin actually right before he came on, and I'm happy I did because it gave me fresh eyes. I haven't watched Marvin since the Michigan game. Um, where I'm a little concerned with him is what you actually just mentioned, right? The yards of the catch, right? While he did better this year compared to the peers in the draft, not spectacular, not bad, no way bad. None of these things that he's doing are bad, right? His drop percentage is a little iffy at times. His percentage of open targets isn't great. But what separates him from everybody else is his athletic ability, right? Like he's just a freak athlete, which is why I was really upset to see him that he's not going to test at all. Because
Yeah.
I would love to put hard numbers on how much of a freak this guy is. We think like he would have an RAS score of like 9.9, right? Like one of the best.
Right.
But we don't know now. Now we have no idea. Though we have what Bruce Feldman put out like in August that he's like a 4.37 guy and a 3.93 shuttle guy, and we could see it on tape. But I would love to have seen it in person, or at least with lasers, because I don't think he separated himself enough from someone like Malik Neighbors, who had pretty similar production numbers, if not better, in a lot of these areas. And no, he didn't do anything at the combine either, but I believe he's going to test at his pro day. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to do anything the entire draft process. How do you feel about his decision to not do anything?
It brings up an interesting conversation with where the combine is going, right? Because the entire draft process, there's not really a lot of power in the hands of the players. You get measured, height and weight, arm length, wingspan, your medicals get rechecked. They put you on a 40-yard dash line and measure you against your peers. They do the same for vertical and broad jump and all that. And so, for some of the guys that are the best athletes, sometimes it's a chance to prove themselves in their class. But for Marvin Harrison Jr., it's interesting because it's a little bit like the LeBron slam dunk contest theory, right? For many, many years, people believed that LeBron was the best dunker in the world, right? And I think that certainly like closer to, his late 20s, early 30s, people just believed that LeBron was the best dunker in basketball. And people were always really disappointed. Why won't LeBron do the slam dunk contest? What's going on here? Well, here's his argument. You already think I'm the best. So if I do the slam dunk contest, the only place to go is down. The only place to go is that I don't live up to your expectations. A little bit of like what you were talking about here when you're evaluating Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm not saying that you're wrong about that, but Marvin is already widely considered wide receiver one in this class. Why would he do anything in a draft process that is so, how do I say this, delicate, I guess, right? You've got Malik Neighbors nipping at your heels. You've got Rome Odunze putting on an absolute show. Like these dudes are right there. If Marvin would have shown up and even not looked superhuman, because I think that goes into it too. The bar right now is superhuman for him. If you show up to Indianapolis and you have a combine test, or even at your pro day, and you have numbers that are pretty damn good, but they're not superhuman, all of a sudden, does that doubt creep in? All of a sudden, do people start putting Malik Neighbors a little bit ahead of you? Rome Odunze a little bit ahead of you? Right now, he doesn't have to do that. So I get it, because this is one of the few instances, and we see this with quarterbacks too, right? This has been going on with quarterbacks for a long, long time. The guys that we think are going to go number one overall, a lot of times they don't throw at the combine. Maybe they don't even throw at their pro day. And the reason why is because there's so much at stake with their draft position, how much money they could make, their perception, what team they're going to go to. And if you already basically have it lined up to about this is going as good as it's possibly going to go for me. Why would you put any sort of doubt out there? Now, there's the, hey, compete kind of part of this that some people can bring up, but it's a little bit like opting out of the bowl games at this point, too. It's just players are doing what they think is the best for them. And in a draft process that is generally controlled and benefits the teams and not the players, when players have the opportunity to take a little bit of control for themselves, I get it. I don't necessarily think it's going to become a big time standard. Like nobody's going to be doing the combine anymore. But for rare cases when guys are at the top of their position group, I can understand it.
So I agree with you in some of those terms. So like Caleb Williams, right? No one is challenging Caleb Williams at 1-1, right? That's the best thing that happened to Caleb Williams this year was Jaden Daniels, right? Jaden Daniels coming out and kind of jockeying for QB2 spot with Drake May has shifted the conversation from what could have been May versus Williams to May versus Daniels.
Mm-hmm.
So Williams has nowhere to go but down, right? I don't know if Harrison Jr. is that much, like really that much of a difference between Malik Neighbors in terms of how people are ranking them, right? Like it seems very close. Rome put on a hell of a combine, so I think he solidified himself as that third guy. But I don't like, because my problem with Marvin Harrison Jr., and I agree that right now he is the number one guy in the receiver class. It's not like Malik can't jump him, right? Like May is not jumping, and Daniels is not jumping Williams in the next 2 months. But there is a world where I think Malik Neighbors could jump Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think what separates Marvin from Malik is just how much of a freak he is. And now we're not going to have any numbers on him at all. It could become. Listen, he's going to go from like 4 to 5. It's not going to be a massive drop. Right?
No. But I know what you're saying. I just don't think. Like, I agree with you. I've heard that teams have Malik Neighbors as wide receiver 1. There are some teams out there who have Malik Neighbors as wide receiver 1. But I still think the majority has Marvin Harrison Jr. comfortably wide receiver 1. And I think Marvin is just going through this process saying, if I test a certain way and you guys just don't like it for whatever reason, again, I'm not going to give you power in this process to knock me down from what has been stellar tape from the young man over the last 2 years. And he's just going to tell people the whole time, just go watch the tape. Just go watch the tape. And I'm not saying that, because I'm with you. There is a world in which Malik Neighbors could be wide receiver 1 off the board. But I also I understand why Marvin is doing it, because he is so consensus wide receiver 1 right now.
I guess it really depends on who Arizona has as receiver 1.
Right.
Arizona
That's the only thing that matters. If 31 other NFL teams all have Marvin Harrison Jr. comfortably wide receiver 1, but the Cardinals don't, well, then Malik might be wide receiver 1 off the board. And we could sit here and say, see, the NFL was higher on Malik Neighbors. And it's like, all right, maybe.
One team was.
Probably not. One team was. That's all we know for sure.
So it was thrown out to me by one of your PFF guys. I'm not sure if he wants his name mentioned, so I won't do it. But he was saying like, kind of like an NBA type deal where Arizona got to Marvin and was like, don't test, don't do anything. We're going to take you at 4. We don't want anyone jumping the Patriots. So just don't do anything. And if that's the case, then it's like, well, Marvin's like the first I'm following is 4. Like, I'm not going 1, 2, 3 anyway. Because and I get that. If that's the case, then
here's the thing too. He's interviewing with teams.
Of course,
it's not that Marvin Harrison Jr. is like not doing anything, like not talking to teams. And the most important part of the draft process for these guys is the interviews anyways. So he's doing that part of it, just so we're very clear. It's not like he's opting out of everything that has to go on in the draft process. So there is absolutely a world where he could meet with the Patriots or he could meet with the Cardinals and they go, hey, buddy, we're going to draft you. So do whatever you want after that, but it doesn't matter what you do testing wise. So,
well, that's pretty common for all these things. Like when I used to work at the Senior Bowl, like there were, 10 guys that were not on the roster that would come for interviews that were like bigger name guys that were like, just guys who opted out. So yeah, I know absolutely he's definitely doing that. But kind of continuing to talk about opting out here. I would say half of the top 150 receivers didn't do any agility drills, like at all. And I talked to one of the head of analytics at one of the teams, and I asked him about that because he was pretty upset about, like, based on where it's structured, these guys are just skipping agility drills. And I asked him, like, do we have the tracking data to make up for this lack of testing? And he said flat out, no, we do not. We do not have the numbers for that. And I don't know what you found in your evaluations, but in the research I've done, the agility testing numbers have been more indicative of long-term success than the pure speed numbers or explosion numbers. And the fact that we're having so many guys to skip what I think are two of the most important drills in the combine, I think is a bad trend for receivers.
Well, it sucks for us, again, this is receivers that are just simply saying, hey, we're going to run the events that get the most traction on social media. We're going to do the 40, we're going to do the vert, we're going to do the broad. And training for those events is a different type of training than training for the agility drills. So I think you look at a lot of these guys and they probably have opted into these strategies where they say, okay, we're going to train as much as we can, as best we can for the explosiveness drills. We're going to train for the 40. We're going to train for the broad, and we're going to train for the vert when it comes to the combine. And then at your pro day, the next couple of weeks or however long it is between the combine and the pro day, we'll train for the agility drills. And I bet more of these guys will do agility drills at pro day. So we will have a little bit more in the numbers, but it's just such a different way to train that, again, like we said, there's so much on the line for these players that do you want to give an NFL evaluator any doubt in who you are as a player versus having really good tape out there? Because you can understand why guys who probably didn't have the best year on tape are wanting to do all sorts of drills. Look how athletic I am. No, I'm a lot better than my tape says. But if you felt like you had really good tape last year, I can understand why you don't want to run, because you don't want to, for whatever reason, put any sort of doubt in somebody's mind. So
in my opinion, I think obviously I understand why Malik and Marvin wouldn't do it, but any receiver that's not mocking the top 20, like I would absolutely do every drill you possibly can.
Yeah, unless
you're Keon Coleman, then you probably shouldn't do anything.
Unless you're bad at it, right?
Right, but eventually that's going to come out, like if you're bad at it or not.
Right, but here's the thing: it'll come out after you're drafted, right? Like the team will have already drafted you, so like you're just trying to get drafted. The players and the agents, they're just trying to game the game as much as the NFL teams are. So I know that this pisses NFL teams off when they don't train and all that, but they're trying to get their money, right? They're trying to get drafted.
I get that.
So, you look at a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. had a fantastic season, a super productive season as a vertical threat type of a player. He comes into the combine, he runs a 4.33 at 209 pounds, is the fastest guy not named Xavier Worthy. And it's like that dude massively won the combine because of how fast he was able to run at his size. What I love is the next part of his evolution as a receiver, his agility, his ability as a route runner, his fluidity. Yes. Does the 3-cone and the short shuttle show us the baseline of that for him? Yes. But he's probably not good at it right now. So he's not going to run it. He's only going to give people the ability to see, look at how good I am at this. And he's going to make some team draft him and not know whether or not they could do the agility stuff.
Wasn't that at this point? He's like securely in the top 25. Like that seems like that's pretty good, right?
Yes.
But I think honestly, for guys like Xavier Worthy, who just ran a 4.21, like he's probably been bumped up into the top 30, top 32. But I think guys that did run good 3-cones, good shuttles, I do think that bumped up a little bit.
I think Ricky Pearsall.
Dude, Ricky's on everyone's radar right now.
Ricky could very easily be the first pick of the second round. He could very easily go to Carolina at 33.
And he was being talked about, back into the second, front of the third, and now we're talking about almost the wrap for him. Like that's incredible. And so right now we have, I think it's 7 receivers being talked about in the first round, like pretty healthily. Do you feel like is 7 too much, or is it closer to 5 or 6? Like, what are you thinking right now for this receiver group?
Let's see. We got Marvin's 1, Malik is 2, Rome is 3, Brian Thomas Jr. is 4. I think Xavier Worthy is 5 because he's getting in with that 40 time.
Mhm.
Somebody said somebody gave me the over under 5.5 the other day, and I said take the over because I named 5 receivers very easily that I think are going in the top for in the first round right there. And then you have guys like Roman Wilson, Troy Franklin, A.D. Mitchell, Lad McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, Keon Coleman, like you all of those guys. All we need is one more to get over 5.5.
So what I saw was Keon Coleman and Xavier Leggett were the 2 that I saw that like could possibly get into that.
I don't think Legette's going in the first round.
So I'm
He's
yeah.
just not big enough. Like
Well,
if he was as big as South Carolina had him listed at, which is like 6'3" with
mhm.
super long arms, then I think that we got a chance for him to go in the back end of the first round. But he's only barely over 6'1". He's still 221 pounds. So he's a big wide receiver. He's
Right.
super explosive. So like I'm not worried about that at all. But when you are a contested catch receiver and you're only a shade over 6'1", your arm length's not nearly as long as we thought it was going to be, and his hands are way smaller than we thought it was going to be. It's just, I don't think that player gets
No,
in the back end of the first round.
I can understand why he wouldn't, right? This is what I'm seeing right now. And from picks 27 to 35, they change daily, it seems like,
You're
because
right.
like you
You're
never
right.
know where these guys are going to go. And that's I feel like that part of the draft is the most unpredictable because it's just styles make fights at that point. It's whoever the team likes. It doesn't those guys are all relatively graded in the same tier. It depends on who the team likes, right?
Mhm.
Keon Coleman, though, run that 4.6. How much does that hurt him? Like, is he done for the first round? Like, I still see his name in the first round pretty consistently, but like as we go through this draft process until we get to late April, is that 4.6 gonna be like, oh man, like that's how do you pick a 4.6 receiver in the
Here's
first
the thing
round?
with me and Keon Coleman, man. So much of this draft process, so much of every draft process is about who these players are, the
Mhm.
interviews. You're getting to know these people that you want to invest in when it comes to these first round or even just like top 50 picks. Without knowing Keon Coleman myself, I've never sat down and talked to him. I've never interviewed him. I'd let somebody else draft him. And I mean, just like entirely first round, second round, third round. Like I'd let somebody else draft him. I wouldn't. The 40 time is so weird, especially when he had the fastest miles per hour in the gauntlet drill then. So it was like he was the fastest on the field, but he couldn't hit sub 4.6 in the 40. His separation is bad on film, but we know he's a better athlete and a more fluid athlete than the separation scores that he showed. He was too much of a contested catch receiver, and so you can't really make a living just being a contested catch receiver at the NFL level. So it's like I don't know what to do with him. I have no idea what to do with him. Um, I think he's just this alpha X wide receiver, but is he going to be a wide receiver 1 someday? Or is he just kind of like a bigger, maybe like what Nico Collins was before this past season, where it was just like, this is our big X receiver. We've got him on the field. He can block, he can handle bigger corners. But he just wasn't a breakout guy. And maybe Nico Collins is the blueprint to he would become more someday, but I'd let somebody else draft Keon Coleman, man. I really would.
So speaking of big X's, right? So back in the day, X's and Z's were pretty. You could X were bigger guys, Z's were able to were a little more route runners. But we're seeing the best receivers in the league now kind of go away from that model of like these 6'3", 220-pound guys, where it's like Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown and Stephon Diggs. Like these are not dudes that you're like, oh man, like it's like DK Metcalf is bigger than all those dudes like combined. Like if you put them in a blender. So like, do you think the days of like the big X is gone? Like, is it more that the blending between X and Z are kind of they're difficult to see at this point?
Yeah, I think to the second part of your question, I think that that's very true. When I go through my wide receiver rankings and I'm kind of building out the full scouting reports to a lot of these receivers, I would say 5-ish years ago, I started doing this. I have like a receiver type column and I will
Mhm.
put like, I think this guy's an X. I think he's a Z. I think he's a Y, like I think he's like a whatever. And every year I have to basically tell myself like, okay, you're either an X/Z or you're a Z/slot, like one of the two. So normally it's like, do you have the size and the strength to get off press coverage? Because if you do, then you're either a flanker type or an X receiver. If you don't really have the size or strength or length to be able to get off press coverage, then I think you're a flanker or a slot. Like, and so it's no longer I have these 3 categories of receivers. It's basically two categories of receivers. Do I think you're big and strong enough to get off slot or to get off press? If I do, that's how I label you. If not, I give you the other label. So that's about it. So I don't want to say that the X role is going away, because I never think that that's the case, especially when you get in these like condensed formations and you're running towards the strength of the formation. You still want a wide receiver who can help you out in the blocking game, who can really make a difference as a blocker, whether it's close to the line of scrimmage or out towards the sideline. So I think that that role will always be there, but it's not as streamlined as it used to be. Wide receivers are a lot more fluid than they were in even, I would say, like the 2010s. Yeah.
Right. I think the prototypes have changed too, right? Like that's really the difference, right? You're not, a guy's traits are maybe more important than his size.
Yeah. I mean, look, when Atlanta started putting Julio Jones in the slot, I mean, we were all screwed. Like football was forever changed when Atlanta started doing that. Like Larry Fitzgerald, like playing in the slot as well.
AJ
like,
Green, the slot in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean,
like it changed everything.
You started getting these wide receiver ones that you just felt like always had to be outside receivers, and then you just started to give them two-way goes, and you went, "Oh, okay, well, this is going well for us." And defenses now had to really adjust, but that's where we are in today's day and age. But I know what was happening before Julio Jones, but Julio is the one where it was just a insane athlete who you were always told had to be this outside wide receiver, who then all of a sudden was playing a ton in the slot, putting a ton of stress on the linebackers, on the slot corners, and on the safeties, and the team just didn't know what to do with it. So
right, and I do think that back in the day, the slot was seen as like your third option, and that's no longer the case.
No,
like
no,
like you
and that can no longer be the case on the flip side too, right? I tell people all the time, like your slot corner cannot be your third best corner on your team. Like if your slot corner is sometimes your best corner on your team, that might be great for you. Like you need that. So
no, I agree, because with the middle of the field is so important, and it's like kind of giving up with your probably the worst coverage guy is not the best. But I've held you way too long. So before we get out of here, tell everyone where you can find your stuff. I know you just released another version of the draft guide pretty recently, so tell everyone where is all the money going to PFF? Direct everyone there.
Yes, PFF.com. If you got a subscription right now, you can go to the draft guide tab and you can see the very first iteration, the first version of the 2024 NFL draft guide. It's a culmination of a lot of people's hard work, not just my scouting reports, but we got a phenomenal data gathering team, editing team, graphics team that really puts that together and really brings it to life. So super proud of that. We got 150 prospects on there right now. The scouting summaries, the strengths and weaknesses, the traits, the player comps, all that good stuff. And we're going to be adding more players to it as we get up to draft weekend. So hoping to have over 250 players on that as we release new versions over the next month and a half.
Well, that's incredible. Trevor, you're the man. Thank you so much for joining me. It was great seeing you.
Appreciate it, brother. Anytime.
All right. Thank you for Trevor for sticking on for that long. He stayed way longer than I planned on having him on, but it was great talking with him. To wrap up, let's talk about the franchise tag real quick. The guys that were tagged, in case you missed it today, Josh Allen and Brian Burns, the edge rushers, Josh Allen of Jackson, Brian Burns of Carolina. Safety, Kyle Duggar of New England. T. Higgins, we already knew was franchise tagged by the Bengals. Jalen Johnson, we already kind of knew, the corner out of Chicago. Just Mabuki, the tackle from Baltimore, was tagged officially. We knew that earlier this week. Michael Pittman Jr. was officially tagged. He wasn't even... It was a last minute type deal. He wasn't tagged when I interviewed Trevor in the afternoon. But we knew from Chris Ballard's interview with Solomon Wilcots that was going to happen. L'Jarius Sneed was tagged. We knew that a couple days ago. Antoine Winfield Jr. from the Buccaneers was tagged. The guys that were not tagged, 2 New York Giants, Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney, both not tagged, and Christian Wilkins of Miami, not tagged. We are so close to the start of free agency. I'm going to have Matt Giatina on tomorrow. I think we'll talk a little bit about some of these guys I talked about, the other first round guys. We'll see if I get through that by tomorrow. If not, we're going to talk about some New York Giants, New York Jets receiving core, talk about what they have to do to build out that core for 2024. But until then, still have no outro. Cheers.